This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and today it is Wednesday. It's February 7th, 2024. Thank you for joining us on thetruthcentral.com. On Twitter, now X, you can find me at Corsi Jerome 1. All small letters all together, at Corsi Jerome 1. My Substack, and I'll be posting more on Substack again today, is jeromecorsiphd.substack.com. And I'm right now posting quite a bit from my book, so especially the book on Neo-Marxism, the two books I'm writing in this Great Awakening trilogy. Number one book was the truth about energy, global warming, and climate change. And the second one is the truth about Neo-Marxism. That's the second book, Neo-Marxism, Cultural Maoism, and Anarchy. Third book, which I will probably try writing later this year, will be about transhumanism, artificial intelligence, and perpetual life extension. What these three books do is they say, number one is that the global warming is a lie. Number two, the neo-Marxism is why they lie. They're Marxists. And number three is where they're going, which is transgenderism, and to depopulate the world so that they can be the masters of the world, having all the world's resources for themselves. It's a really dark agenda, satanic. Okay, now the major story I want to cover to start with today is that Tucker Carlson is in Russia, and he's started to interview Putin. I think Putin has been back channeling, trying to get a word to the United States that Russia does not want to go to World War III. Russia is not anxious for a nuclear war. Russia is not really trying to be aggressive and going to attack NATO. All these are lies. The NATO was provocative by expanding to the border of Russia. We have like 47 military bases now in Scandinavia, the countries of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. And that's right on Putin's doorstep. And we don't understand the history here that in World War II, 1939, Stalin and Hitler had a non-aggression pact. The world had expected that the two would attack each other. No one was sure whether Stalin would attack Russia or whether Hitler would attack, Stalin would attack Nazi Germany or Nazi Germany would attack Stalin. And finally, they signed this agreement, and then the Nazis broke it and attacked Russia. But before that period of time, while that non-aggression pact was in place, Russia invaded Finland and they invaded Ukraine. Why? Because Russia wants an access to the Atlantic, which it has to get through the Baltic Sea, through Finland, or it has to get through the Black Sea, which means Ukraine. That's the port the ports along southern border of Ukraine are on the Black Sea. It goes into the Mediterranean, it goes into the Atlantic Ocean. It'd be similar to us. The United States, of course, we have access to both oceans. Russia is landlocked when it gets to going to the Atlantic Ocean. This is a major issue for Russia. And blocking Russia with NATO extending to its borders, especially in these two countries, is provocative. Putin had tried to get agreements that NATO would not expand into Ukraine. If that agreement had been made, and Putin was trying desperately to get it made, Putin would not have invaded. There was already war going on because the eastern part of Ukraine is largely Russian-speaking, and the government of Ukraine was actually having military exercises to try to root out the pro-Russian militia in the eastern part of Ukraine before the invasion occurred. And we have messed this up horribly by having agreements from Hillary Clinton to work in her foundation, the Clinton Foundation. So Bill Clinton, ex-president, was heading the foundation while she was Secretary of State under Obama. She had a private email server. That private email server, she was exchanging emails to favor various oligarchs like Pinochet in Ukraine, who was also funding the Clinton Foundation. This was a complete bribery scheme. I wrote a book called Partners in Crime. No one did anything about it. And then Biden went and got his son involved in Ukraine and in China, and Biden's made a lot of money. Now, Putin's just about had it. So Putin invited Tucker Carlson to come over through some intermediaries. I'm sure this was intercession to get him there. And the intermediaries arranged for Tucker to now be interviewing Putin. And the first story to come out is Putin is saying is Joe Biden is not running the United States. He said the same forces which have always run the United States are still running it now. You may change presidents, but you do not change those in real power. That is who we have to deal with. Joe Biden is just a facade for this power structure. Now, of course, that means Putin's a conspiracy theorist, right? No, he's telling the truth. Between the moneyed interests, between the Council on Foreign Relations, all these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, the power structure of the United States is money. And the moneyed interests of the United States are globalists. They belong to the World Economic Forum. They run multinational corporations. They want to have world trade so they can have world markets. They want interlocking directorates. This is the same plan that Nazi Germany had. It was Hitler's whole idea was to have a little bit of socialism to take care of the people, keep them happy, while the international corporations ran Germany and the world, with the government participating. So it was government-private partnerships that ruled the world in Hitler's view, with socialism to keep the people happy. The problem is it doesn't really work because this becomes an evil power structure, and it produces wars. It produces 2 world wars because the people who want to create this new world order, where they're the kings and we're the serfs, is an old story that this ultimately does not produce a stable society. It goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle said to have a stable society, you've got to have a strong middle class. Now, that's the structure that makes sense. And we've had a strong middle class in the United States through recently. Certainly after World War II, we built a strong middle class, maybe the strongest ever built in the history of the world. And it was stable, relatively stable. It doesn't last for very long. And right now, we are destroying it. Powell, who's the chairman of the Federal Reserve, was yesterday saying that with the amount of debt that the Biden administration is spending, we're going now at an accelerating rate of generating money. 50 billion here, 50 billion there, 50 billion here. What's happening is our debt is rising faster than our gross domestic product. And this idea of Bidenomics working and a strong growth is all fueled by deficit spending, which cannot go on permanently. Eventually, just repaying that debt becomes unsustainable. So when countries begin dumping treasury bonds, we can't sell them anymore. The country is approaching bankruptcy. And with people living ordinary lives in the middle class, you're experiencing much higher costs of food, much higher costs of living, and much greater instability. Now, this story about Putin saying that Joe Biden is just a facade is going to be a disruptive story because the Democrats are still going to they're trying to run Biden for re-election. Biden, I think, is mentally deficient. He's undergoing senior dementia. It's obvious. Now, the mainstream media won't cover it, but the mainstream media won't cover anything. Anybody watching NBC, CBS, or ABC News, you're just getting fed propaganda. You're just getting fed the official government line. Turn them off. In fact, it's probably better to turn off all news, including Fox, and begin getting your news on the internet, searching out for sources who are still telling truth. We're the Truth Central here, and we're resolved to tell the truth. The truth is, Biden is a figurehead, and you have a hard time controlling him because he doesn't know where he is or what he's doing, except for maybe that moment. Can't even complete a sentence. His sentences aren't coherent. How can we have in the office of the President of the United States someone with mental deficiencies that are obvious? This is a low point in the history of the United States. And the hard part is to realize that those who are ruling it want to destroy the United States because they want to destroy what exists to create their new world order. And that also includes depopulation by the billions. So what I'm explaining to everyone, and explaining it in no uncertain terms, is that we are much closer to nuclear war than we have ever been. And NATO is ready for, the generals again are ready for a nuclear war. This is a moment in history like it was in 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis when Khrushchev put nuclear weapons in Cuba and President Kennedy found out and objected. Our generals wanted to go to a nuclear war. They thought they had first strike capabilities to defeat Russia. And Russian generals wanted to go to war. What Kennedy did is he back-channeled to Khrushchev, and they resolved it by having a blockade into Cuba, and the Russian ships stopped at the blockade and turned around and went back to Russia. That ended that crisis. There was a lot of back dealing. Kennedy had to say, we'll take our missiles out of Turkey, which we had. But again, we waited a period of time, so it wasn't obviously linked to the settlement of the Cuban Missile Crisis. What I'm saying is, if we had a president here, like Trump, who was in charge, and Trump is assembling a team to give himself a better chance of dealing with Washington. In Washington, the first thing you got to know is when somebody's talking to you, assume they're lying. Your only question is, why are they lying? What do they want? Once you figure that out, you can know how to deal with it. But in Washington, everybody is out for themselves. It's a very, very difficult and dirty place to be. And we had a lot of GOP who wanted to destroy Trump, who came in and begged for jobs. And we were saying to Trump everything he wanted to hear, and then turned around, and when they got the position of power, and stabbed him in the back. The one I most was after was Bill Barr, Attorney General, because he did nothing to clean up the Department of Justice and the political prosecutions for Russian collusion, which did not occur. Putin was not interfering in our election. There was all the stories made up in that Steele dossier were lies. Okay, now let's go to the next story, because one of my themes today, and I want you to understand this clearly, is that this new world order crowd lies. They lie about everything. I don't think there's a single thing they don't lie about. So we had yesterday the vote on the impeachment of this secretary over the border, and one vote changed it. So there was a tie vote at the end of the day, 215, 215. And one of the Republicans who had voted for impeachment changed their vote to a no, so that the noes had it. They won by one vote, and then he could call for a reconsideration. So it's not yet over. This Mayorkas guy is going to be probably gone. But what we're seeing in the Republican Party is the degree to which the Republicans are Democrat light, which means they're in on the spending, which means they're in on the bribery, which means they're being paid off. And Mitch McConnell's got to go. He's also got mental problems, he's got health problems. He's not at his peak. And his wife, Elaine Chao, who has a wealthy family in China, that family wouldn't exist. They would all be dead if Mitch McConnell wasn't doing what China wanted. Okay, so that's the first. Our politics right now are a mess. And the Republican Party is a mess, not raising as much money as it should be for a presidential election. Because again, the GOP is not a conservative party. Both of our political parties are outmoded, they're dysfunctional. The Democrats are now Marxists, clear and simple. And the Republicans are out for money, mostly the rhinos. They don't like Donald Trump. They don't really want to clean everything up. There's not even a consensus among the Republicans to close the border. Again, the country is going through a massive change. We are in a transitional period of time globally where the United States is not going to be the power it was after World War II. We've lost that edge economically, and it's largely the Cloward-Piven theory to sociologists at Columbia in the 1970s figured out that socialism could destroy the country if it spent us into the poorhouse. And the Congress, like de Tocqueville said, once it realized it could take the public treasury and spend it for their own benefit, would do so. And we are continuing to do that. And many of our great institutions, our healthcare system, Obamacare was designed to undermine. Obama's fundamental transformation of America was to destroy capitalism and to move us into a communist country. I made that clear when I wrote Obama Nation in 2008, saying Obama had been trained by Frank Marshall Davis, and he was a communist in his education. He was educated as a communist. Okay, now, if we continue with the next stories I want to cover, I'd like to go, I think, to this one on the Japanese shipping giant that is warning us that this blockage of the Red Sea, and you can see you've got a chart here. Chris can show you the Red Sea map right there. The Red Sea comes from the Suez Canal by Egypt into the Mediterranean. That canal was dug to create a route. Chris is pointing it out right there through the Red Sea, where you can come down the Red Sea and you can get out into the Indian Ocean. The alternative to that is you've got to go around the southern tip of Africa, which is a much larger route. It takes about a third time more. That map I don't think includes anything except for emphasizing the Red Sea. But it takes about a third time more and costs a third plus in money. Now, this is a major disruption because what it means is that the shipping of having to go this extra distance is destroying or sufficiently messing up the supply chain. And you've got these Houthi rebels who are firing projectiles at commercial vessels. They struck one yesterday. It highlights the risk of going through the Red Sea. Now, to retaliate against these Houthi rebels in Yemen, which is, again, below, it's to the south of Saudi Arabia, Yemen and Oman, right on the Indian Ocean. Now, these rebels have these small boats, and they come out and they harass the shipping, commercial shipping. Of course, if the ship is Russian, it comes through without problem. If the ship is registered to Israel, they've got a lot of problems. If it's registered to any other country, it's iffy. They may or may not get attacked. We have our Navy in there. We have, at least one carrier task force. We did at one time have two. So this Japanese shipping Mitsui OSK Lines issued a warning today that shipping disruptions might extend for up to a year, including that expectations for short-term disruptions that they're not going to end in the near future. So this is an historic event because now you've got enough disruption in the Middle East that shipping is going to be much more difficult, more costly, which is again going to put more pressure on inflation. So this Mitsui OSK has about 800 vessels in its fleet, and it said last month that all transits through the Red Sea were halted due to the Houthi drone and missile attacks on commercial vehicles. So a small group of rebels has just disrupted international shipping. Now, the Middle East is also on fire because you've got Israel continuing with the assault in Gaza. The Gaza Strip is a narrow strip of land on the Mediterranean in Israel that is just to the bordering on to Egypt, on Egypt's east. And you've got Jordan and you've got Iraq and Syria, which all have in the area. You see Iran is to the east of Iraq and to the northeast of Saudi Arabia. And so Iran is the terror master. And of course, John Kerry and Obama made a deal with Iran where Iran could develop nuclear weapons, just not on their time in the White House. And Obama shipped Iran airplanes full of cash. Cash is, fungible. It's not traceable. And they didn't do it electronically. They did it in cash. And Iran has also gotten a lot of breaks from the Biden administration. This Secretary Blinken, who's over there, Secretary of State in the Middle East, is pressing for a Palestinian state. Truthfully, the Bidens and the Democrats prefer the Hamas terrorists to Israel. This, again, reflects the underlying hatred of the United States that has become the core of the Democratic Party. Barack Obama, who probably is going to have Michelle run when they exit Joe Biden's stage left. The Biden administration is continuing Obama's policies of tilting towards Iran. So we now are having fighting going on in Lebanon because of Hezbollah. We've attacked our bases in Iraq and Syria have been attacked. We've retaliated against Iran-based Revolutionary Guard units operating in Iraq and Syria. And now we've been attacking the Houthi rebels in Yemen. So this war has expanded to include Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen, which is essentially a large part of this peninsula. Saudi Arabia has the most land mass, but again, we've been in Iraq fighting now for years and have achieved very little. I think the Biden administration will probably pull out of Iraq and Syria just as they pulled out of Afghanistan. And quite frankly, I'm not sure there's anything that can be done in the Middle East right now. If Iran is funded, Iran's going to cause terror. And they're going to have the Revolutionary Guard be disruptive in every single state in which they can take root. Palestinians themselves are disruptive. They're also Marxists. They tried to disrupt Jordan, tried to disrupt Egypt, and they were thrown out of both countries. Palestinians now are in Lebanon, but they're also in the Gaza and the West Bank. And the idea of creating a Palestinian state that would be dominated by Hamas is suicidal for Israel, because these groups are dedicated to the destruction of Israel. When you see the situation going on here and in Ukraine, with the potential of the war to expand into Finland, depending upon whether Russia is going to continue tolerating our military bases on their border, you can see why Putin is reaching out. Now, Putin has also gotten closer to Iran. So Putin's playing both sides in a sense, because he's aligned with China, he's aligned with Iran, he's not shipping his natural gas to Europe. And so Putin is kind of playing both sides. At the same time, Putin wants to establish Russia to its former glory, not necessarily communist, but again, aligned with China, which is communist, and Iran. And this forms a potentially very strong anti-American group, anti-American axis, this BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and now expanding into several OPEC countries. So the world is essentially reforming its power structure in terms of geopolitics. And the United States is now going to be faced with a multipolar world that we do not dominate. And our military is much more interested in having generals, men in dresses and wigs, giving orders to the troops, which is not going to be, no wonder we can't recruit enough troops. Who would want to do this? And Putin is right. Putin gave a speech saying the West is destroying itself. We're normalizing pedophilia. We are normalizing transgenderism. We're destroying families. We're abandoning our traditional values. Putin knows that means the country is becoming destabilized, and that was the goal of the Neo-Marxists, to stabilize the country and then destroy it and put in their utopia, which will be sold as this is going to be wonderful for everyone, when the consequences are that their real goal is depopulation. And when they're attacking farmers, they're attacking farmers because they want to attack our food supply. If they'll attack our food supply, these monsters would have a nuclear war. And there's no better way to kill billions of people than nuclear war. Even if they didn't kill them with the bomb blast, they would kill them with the fallout. And without food, people do not do very well for very long. You know, it's about 1 day or 2 days, and you don't have water, you're in serious trouble. You might go 3 or 4 days without food. But again, we are meant to be having constant water and renourishment, or we don't live. It's like you have to sleep every night. You know, we are human beings. We have physical needs. We're not yet spiritual beings, although we are fundamentally spiritual beings. Okay, Polish farmers are now going to join the European tractor revolt. I encourage you to watch some of the videos, because these farmers are coming in with their tractors. They're tying up Paris. They're tying up Berlin. Now they're going to come into Warsaw. Europe is having massive, massive protests, which are largely unreported here. And you just got to see these caravans, miles of tractors. And we've got our caravan going down to the border. And again, it's largely unreported. We're not getting accurate reports right now on the mainstream media. The mainstream media is covering stories like Donald Trump's losing a case about him having immunity against the J6 being prosecuted for this insurrection. This lawfare is producing litigation that is aimed at destroying Trump, even though the litigation itself is largely baseless. How does Trump have an insurrection against himself when he's president? You know, he was in power. He's not revolting against himself. That insurrection is a rising up against the government. So it's insanity to want to charge Trump with insurrection, except that the Democrats are saying that the 2020 election was legitimate, so anybody who questions it is against democracy. You've got to understand the degree of language perversion that comes along with this woke Neo-Marxism. When they say they're for democracy, what they mean is they want censorship of anybody who doesn't agree with them. So it will only be free if we all agree with them. We'll only have a democracy if we all agree with them. And if we don't agree with them all, they'll put chips in us so that they can read what we're thinking and to get the ones who are not thinking correctly off to thought control centers. Okay, so if we continue down this line and continue with this idea of destruction and lying, I also want to point out that worldwide, this whole climate change agenda is failing, and it's failing miserably. Why is it failing? It's failing because it's all a lie. It's all completely a lie. And the European Union is now pushing, the farmers are there protesting, they're pushing back their decarbonization goals. They're saying we won't decarbonize by 2030. We'll push it back. That's because they're losing. They're losing because it doesn't work. So across the board, if you take a look at what's happening with this climate change agenda, you're going to see only retrenchment on the green agenda, with the acknowledgement that it does not work. So there's a really good story here on Zero Hedge today. I'm going to take a look at it for a minute and report on it, because Zero Hedge is saying, let's just take a look at all the failures of the green agenda, and the true costs of net zero are becoming impossible to hide. So Britain dumped this gimmick, really, that they were going to force everybody to have these electric heat pumps powered by renewable energy, when most British households have these cabinet-sized boilers that provide central heat and hot water. So these new devices are largely untested, and they were going to fine everybody excessively if they were to buy a new one of the conventional central heating cabinet-sized boilers, not one of these untried electric heat pumps. Well, under the pressure from the farmers and the like, the British government retrenched from that goal. Biden, the costs of doing wind turbines have gone up about 48%. And so this whole idea of going to have a net zero or a transition to wind and solar is impossible. In New Jersey, major offshore wind farms were canceled when the private companies, for instance, Ørsted, which is the largest offshore wind developer in the U.S. market, abandoned this ocean wind project off New Jersey because it was too expensive. And when the Biden administration doesn't provide subsidies, these projects die. So without a doubt, Biden has, quote, used every available tool to advance the growing American offshore wind industry. But his biggest tool is a pack of lies that claim that these projects are cheaper and will pay for themselves. They don't. So the rating companies have just downgraded a lot of renewable energy companies, including those building offshore wind farms. And the solar panels, again, like Solyndra, we're going to just have fields after fields, acres after acres of useless solar panels once we realize that solar power is not robust enough to power a city. It just takes up too much territory. Okay, so that goes along with the farmer story because, again, the climate change agenda is what produced all this nonsense. And when you see that the goal is to stop farmers from producing food, you begin to realize the extent of evil of this depopulationist agenda. Okay, now I want to cover another story on San Francisco because there's a story in Epoch Times is running a story today in which is making clear that the homelessness, the filth, the closing of businesses, the vacancies in commercial office buildings in San Francisco could spread easily to other cities across the country. We have now an estimated 600,000 people who are homeless in the United States, and many cities are now experiencing severe budget crises handling these homeless. The homeless are allowed to do drugs. They engage in crime. Many of them have psychological problems. But again, if you declare a state of emergency as a mayor, in Los Angeles, 75,000 people live on the street. The current mayor's first action on taking office was to declare a homeless state of emergency. Okay, what are you going to do about it? If you have to put these people in shelters or in some kind of housing, it's extremely costly, and these cities will go bankrupt. Or if you let them stay in their homeless encampments, these people are a blight on the city itself. They make the city more dangerous, make it a battleground for legal, social, economic, and political forces that arise supporting the homeless, who press for more and more money to be spent on the homeless, which is no fundamental solution to the problem. So the homeless advocates insist that long-standing legal precedent guarantees rights to people living on the street, and the cities are now not free to disregard those rights and take away homeless people's property without due process just because some of the homeless commit serious violations and crimes and spark a public outcry. We can't solve this problem given the structure of the liberal laws that we put into place and the bureaucracies that and the non-governmental organizations, the NGOs, that are actually making money serving the needs of the homeless. If our cities become filthy, massively overpopulated with homelessness, overridden with drugs, we're on a very deep slide downward. And this deterioration at a time when the family's under attack, when we have people worried about sex change operations for young children, we're teaching in the schools nothing but confusion. This is a formula for disaster. Okay, now, the take I have on many of these stories is that this is now so out in the open I think the American people are rejecting it. I think the world is rejecting it. I think these globalists are losing, but they're going to become very dangerous when they lose because they don't like losing. They look at the trouble they went to get Trump out of office. We had, Antifa destroying Portland, Oregon. We had George Floyd and riots all over the place. Black Lives Matter taking over Washington, D.C. We had the COVID, which allowed the mail-in ballots. We have one crisis after another. And this global elite has learned how to manage through crisis, because when people are in crisis, they'll ask for more government control to solve the problem. Last story I'm going to comment on, and Chris has had a bit of a flu, so I'm going to ask him to comment after I cover this story, but I didn't want to burden him with having to talk throughout the program when he is struggling not to cough every 2 minutes. But he's getting better. I've seen an improvement over this week, and I'm pleased to see it. We're praying for you here, Chris, to recover. Okay, last story. National Science Foundation. I got a National Science Foundation grant when I was in New Mexico. I was at the University of New Mexico to run a 4-year telephone project to show you could do unemployment insurance and welfare hearings by the telephone. It worked. We saved millions of dollars. The National Science Foundation funded it. At that time, the National Science Foundation was one of the most illustrious organizations in academics. I was very pleased and honored to get a National Science Foundation grant. The National Science Foundation today is secretly trying to fund universities to develop AI, artificial intelligence projects that would allow the creation of a censorship-industrial complex where the AI would be screening all public content to identify content that is not in accord with the government narrative and to label that disinformation. So there's going to be a Judiciary Committee and Select Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. They issued a report called The Weaponization of the National Science Foundation, how they're funding the development of automated tools to censor online speech at scale and trying to cover it up. So the National Science Foundation was lying. They developed a media strategy that considered blacklisting certain American media outlets because they were scrutinizing National Science Foundation's funding of censorship and propaganda tools. This is entirely disgraceful, and it should not be going on. The fact that it is going on is an indication that the penetration of the woke agenda has reached not only the highest levels of our universities, where Harvard has a president who is DEI appointed, Claudine Gay, who had plagiarized her dissertation and other papers that she had published, scarce though they were. Now, if the National Science Foundation is corrupted and the research is being funded is on the woke agenda, again, these things are very badly broken. And I think it's going to take the intervention of God to clean all this up, which I'm going to talk about as we close. Chris, before we do, we covered a lot of ground today. Would you like to comment?
That we did. We covered a heck of a lot, but it's dangerous to see how the U.S. government, by the way, is overspending on everything else, yet pouring a lot of money into, we'll call it disinformation, but definitely censorship on the taxpayer dime.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we have a First Amendment. The government is not in control of the dialogue here. The government should be constantly criticized, constantly examined, constantly scrutinized. That's what our founding fathers set up. That's why they set up the First Amendment. We should be free to practice religion. That's the Second Amendment. We were given substantial rights, and this New World Order hates the rights that we have. They want a controlled citizen base that they can depopulate. There's too many people in their view.
Right. And political dissidents who just walk into the Capitol building when let in, they're thrown in jail. You can burn down a city, you can burn down neighborhoods, and you'll be set free by the very same people. It's selective. The only thing worse than total censorship is selective censorship.
Right. Well, you can't protest an abortion center. You'll probably be arrested for a crime because this new world order wants to murder babies, and they want to murder them by the millions. They hate life. It's satanic. Satan hates the life that only God can bestow. Satan hates the peace that only a God-driven people can preserve. Satan hates anything that has to do with love or fostering or growth. A satanic world is a dark, deep world of evil. And that's what we're seeing is now in control increasingly of our institutions, from the CIA, through the White House, through the Congress, through the press, mainstream media, through the universities. So, Chris,
evil destroys. Basically, that's what it is.
It's going to destroy. Yeah,
good and neutral create, evil destroys.
All right, but in the end, let's wrap it up. In the end, God always wins. God will win here too. God will win this battle. God is almighty, and God's a sky fairy. God doesn't exist. That's what the left wants you to believe. Well, innate in the heart of every human being is a recognition of God and a recognition of natural law, that there is right and wrong, and it's not subjective. You want to start imagining that, your gender is different than your sex, and your gender is not determined by your sex. It can be some bizarre configuration that you come up with. That's traditionally a definition of schizophrenia. Now, we're all supposed to celebrate that. That's supposed to be the new normal. That's what Putin's talking about. When our leaders are talking lies and Putin is telling the truth, the world's messed up. I mean, this is not, and when we want to go to war with Putin, we're pushing NATO to the edge. We're being provocative. We're not trying to settle things. We're trying to foster violence and war. Doesn't solve anything. But in the end, God wins. We will have a judgment of God. And the solution to all this is 2 Chronicles 7:14. We got to get down on our knees and ask God to forgive us for letting the world get this insane. God will hear our prayer and heal our land. And it's never too late. With God, all things are possible. It's Dr. Jerome Corsi today. It is Wednesday. It's February 7th, 2024. TheTruthCentral.com. Thank you for joining us. We're doing podcasts every weekday. We'll be back tomorrow. God bless.